Right. Well, again, good morning, everyone. I'm Carolyn Davis, and you've got Susie as well with the Tennessee Chamber on. We're so glad that you joined us today. This is session 4 of the Organizational Health webinar series, and a huge thank you to Greg. 4 weeks, 4 hours of this training, all for us, for our members, so we are very appreciative. Thank you. It's my pleasure. I'm going to give a brief introduction for Greg, but just a few other housekeeping things in case you have not been on any of the webinars yet. You are welcome throughout. You can send any questions or comments that you have in that chat box. Those can go to myself, Susie, Greg. We'll be happy to respond. If you do have questions and you'd prefer us to ask them, Susie and I will be happy to do that. If you would like to ask them at the end, you can unmute yourself. So I know that interaction is always appreciated and questions are welcomed. So with that, today's session is on team effectiveness during COVID-19. And I'm going to introduce Greg Coker. Greg Coker has worked over the last 25 years and consulted with some of America's top organizations and leaders. He's served in senior level roles for 3 Fortune 500 companies. Just a few organizations that have benefited from Greg's leadership development programs include AT&T, General Motors, Paul Mitchell Salons, State Farm Insurance. And I always like to mention there's hundreds of school systems, colleges, nonprofits, and as well as numerous government agencies. So there are 3 values which we've discussed at each session, but I want to mention that again, the 3 values that have driven Greg and today's training, especially during these unprecedented times, are the 3 R's. And the 3 R's are re-engagement, recommitment, and reinvention. So I know going into session 4, I know many of you have joined us for some of the other 3. Great information, and Greg, really looking forward to today's topic on team effectiveness. So I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you. And thanks for everyone on the call. You know, the 3 R's, not to totally wear you out on them, but I'm preaching to Greg Coker, and I'm not preaching to you all because you all are obviously models of the 3 R's, you know, the reinvention, recommitment, re-engagement. Thank you very, very much, Susie and Carolyn, the Tennessee Chamber of Commerce and Industry. This is the 4th session. It's been my honor. I'm humbled and appreciative to be a part of the Tennessee Chamber of Commerce and Industry. First session was on leadership and adversity. You know, you don't pick history, history picks you. I'm convinced that, as I mentioned earlier, that there's some mediocre supervisors, maybe like myself, that have turned into be great leaders as a result of a crisis, as a result of something like COVID-19. So, you know, I think there's going to be more good than bad that comes out of all this. I do a lot of work with school systems. And I was with a call with all the superintendents with an association a couple of days ago. And I said, you know, I never thought about this, but school systems sort of set the tone for this whole country because they were the first ones that had to deal with this COVID-19. And in all honor and respect for those folks there. So we talked about leadership in adversity. The second session was on organizational traction. There's certain organizations like yours, like the Tennessee Chamber of Commerce and Industry, that gain traction, that just keep on going and getting stronger and stronger. And there are certain companies that fall backwards. Some of these restaurants, a lot of these restaurants, you know, survival of the fittest. You know, if they weren't lean and mean before this, you know, they're in tough shape right now. So how do these organizations gain traction? That was the second session we had. The third session last week was on stress management. You know, we all manage stress. We're all depressed. We all are stressed out. We manage stress. Other people don't. Today's session's on team effectiveness, and most of us are part of a team. I'm a part of a team with Susie and Carolyn. I'm not an employee of the Tennessee Chamber of Commerce and Industry, but we serve together on a team of this development. I have a team within my company that I work with. So we're all part of a team for the most part. So we're going to talk quite a bit about team effectiveness today. You'll see some overlap because there is overlap between leadership and team and traction, et cetera. I'll try not to be too repetitive, but these 4 sessions, I'd love to do them for your all's organization, your individual organization. Give me a call. A lot of groups that I work with, like in a chamber, will come back and say, Greg, can you come internally, and we'll customize them It'll take a couple of phone calls with you to customize them to your chamber, to your organization, but we can do that and would be honored to do that. If you could connect with me on Facebook, like my business page, I just developed that. I had a person here yesterday in my office working with me on my Facebook business page. I had a personal page. I didn't have a business page. So if you could like that, I would really appreciate it. Instagram, follow me on Instagram. I'm trying to put some relevant data on there. So the 3 values, again, not to be overly repetitious: re-engagement, reinvention, recommitment. We're all doing that. The 3 books I'm going to mention quite a bit in this session on team effectiveness: The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. Great book. You may have read that or heard about it. Most teams are not very functional. I've been a part of most teams. They're pretty dysfunctional. Unfortunately, most teams I've been a part of have been mediocre. They're not being great. I've been a part of a few great teams that, wow, I couldn't wait to get with that team. And I was sad when the team disbanded. We'll talk about the best team wins, and then the ideal team player. Those are just 3 books that when I do these workshops, I try to pull out from the best practices. As you're going through this session today, maybe on your sheet of paper you have in front of you, rate your teams and use this material. You can have the PowerPoint. I'll send them to Carolyn when I get off this call. You can use my PowerPoint, go back to your team or do a Zoom call and say, let's go through this and really analyze how functional our teams are. And let's be honest, they may be highly functional, they may not. So we'll also talk about these 4 books we've talked about in the prior sessions, the book Traction. Again, if you've not bought that book, you're probably saying, Greg, please shut up about book Traction. It's great. Order it, read it. It's awesome. Start with Why with Simon Sinek. More people are motivated by your why than your what. And in a team, to get that team totally pumped up, you're going to have to make sure why are we here? What's the big picture? 4DX, 4 Disciplines of Execution, the book Good to Great, and then my 3 books. They're free downloads on my website, gregcokerdevelopment.com, if you want to take a look at those. So I start every workshop. We start all 4 of these with an action plan. Again, if you could put that down on the paper you have in front of you, hopefully you'll have some action plans of, maybe the what would be take this material, share with my team next week. And let's totally do an analysis of where our team immediately where they are, but also if you've got teams you're responsible for, to have them do the same. So however you want to do that. Let's talk about teams. On average, 80% of employees' days are now spent working in teams. A huge part of our day, and with all this working from home and COVID-19 and social distancing and doing more with less and furloughs and all this, it's even going to get more working in teams. A Deloitte survey of 7,000 senior executives in 130 countries, almost half said their companies were either in the middle of restructuring or about to embark on it to put more emphasis on teamwork. How do we work in teams? Again, I think that's even going to be accentuated based on, where we currently are. The current era of unprecedented change in business has been described as VUCA. And I'd never heard of VUCA up until a month or so ago, but VUCA, if you're not familiar with it, you better start getting familiar with it, is volatility. How would you rate your organization as far as handling with volatility? How would you rate how your organizations handle this COVID-19 pandemic, the coronavirus? That's some volatile times we're living in. Uncertainty. We are living in some uncertain times. It's getting crazier and crazier and crazier, with social unrest, political, socioeconomic. It's crazy out there. And, if you're not comfortable being uncomfortable, then that's going to be a challenge as being a leader moving forward. Complexity. The issues are so much more complex. The people are more we're all image, and then of course ambiguity. How comfortable are you being uncomfortable? And so you might want to use the VUCA rating scale, which I just made that up. Whatever it is do your organization on VUCA. Do your community. Susie and Carol and I were talking about economic development. From an economic development standpoint, how do you deal with that? to recruit that industry in Johnson City, Tennessee, or in Goodlettsville or Nashville or Gallatin or Jackson, all the great communities out there, then these recruiters or these folks that are coming into your town are going to be a lot more interested in your VUCA rating, more so now than ever. With the pandemic, that's only been more pervasive. So the good news, University of Central Florida and the U.S. Army found that most effective teams have a collective intelligence that allows them to get more work done and spot problems quicker. We're better in a team than we are individually most often. People who feel they are part of a collaborative communicating work group are overall happier on the job. So it's an engagement strategy. To be able to get people to work more effectively together that's going to keep your employees retained in your organization. Stanford and the University of Michigan have shown those in positive team environments have fewer accidents, and healthcare costs are 50% lower than those of their peers not in great teams. So again, it's an insurance issue. So it makes business sense, obviously, and I'm not telling you all anything you don't know. Team collaboration spurs greater creativity and therefore more rapid innovation for customers. So it's good for customer satisfaction. The need to develop new technologies, products which capitalize on new breakthroughs is requiring increased collaboration across departments, discipline work that is best achieved through cross-functional teams. The vaccine, I think we're going to have a vaccine real soon. And I guarantee there are different pharmaceutical industries that are working in collaborative teams, with scientists, with all types of disciplines. I've got the iPhone in front of me here. Most of you all have some type of smartphone. Steve Jobs at the very beginning wanted an 8-hour battery life. My iPhone has 8 hours of battery now. It did at the very beginning. And Steve Jobs supposedly looked at the teams that were there at Apple, and they were all engineers. No offense to engineers, they were all analytical, very smart people. They couldn't figure it out. And Steve Jobs finally said, we're going to get using the social style model, the driver, the analytical, the expressive, the amiable. We're going to make sure you have all four of these. Guess they all had 100% analyticals. A few drivers, but mostly analyticals, engineers, great. What he did is he put amiables on there. Amiables were more focused on customers, on our employees, on our team, let's go have a lunch. We're wearing everybody. The drivers weren't focused on that. They were focused on, let's just keep on going, guys. Come on, we can do some more, which is very effective. So Steve Jobs was a pro at making sure there was some diversity in our teams. Organizations are increasingly relying on teams for decentralized decision-making, speedier action due to fewer layers of bureaucracy, meaning we must evolve from those outdated command and control hierarchy to a network of a teams approach. And I'm sure a lot of us still work with organizations. No offense to the folks that were my managers and supervisors at the phone company there in Nashville. No offense to them, but they were pretty much command and control. Those days are gone. We've got to be a lot more open. And I think this COVID-19 has forced us to be a little bit more comfortable with the uncomfortable, working from home occasionally, a couple of days a week. Let's talk about the 3 virtues of an ideal team player. Number 1, humility. And this is from the book that I mentioned earlier, The Ideal Team Player. Humility. Humility isn't thinking less of ourselves. It's about thinking about ourselves less. Now, in the social style model, I'm expressive driver. Duh. I mean, if I'm not careful, it's all about Greg Coker. I don't do that at the expense of other people, but I'm thinking about how I can contribute, how I can be a part, how I can take charge. Well, I got to be more humble. And I'll be honest with you, sometimes I've fallen guilty of that. Number 2 is hunger. They're hungry. They're hungry to get that 8-hour battery life. They're hungry to get a vaccine going. Strong work ethic, going above and beyond, really above and beyond. And then number 3, they got to be smart. Not just IQ, but EQ, emotional intelligence. So we all are smart. You're smart. You wouldn't be on this call. I wouldn't be doing this call if I wasn't smart. I'm not smart, but I'm smart enough. But what about my emotional intelligence? So on the piece of paper you have in front of you, you might want to say out of these 3, maybe do a Likert scale of 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, however you want to do it. 1 is no humility at all, and 10 is almost too humble. Where are your teams? So I put it together here in sort of a graph for you right here is hunger, humility, and being smart. And in the middle, if you have all three, that is what I think we're trying to achieve with our teams. Where are your teams? What about GWC? From the book Traction, and we talked about that earlier. I love GWC. They get it, they want it, they have the capacity to do it, the skills and experience. So out of 8 team members you got on your team, we're doing a self-assessment on the 3 virtues of an ideal team player. Let's also do GWC, for each team member. So me, I'm gonna go around the room and go, Greg, I'm speaking about me, I think I get it. I got the why, the Simon Sinek, why we're doing this. Man, I'm passionate. I want it. What about capacity to do it? Folks, I may be over my head on this one. You all put me in charge of this, and I don't know. I may not be the right person. I need a little bit more skills and training. I may need to back out, at least not back out of the team, but they have this responsibility to be honest with the G, the W, and the C. Understanding, appreciating, and maximizing the differences. Just talked about that with Steve Jobs. Ask yourself, draw this on a sheet of paper, and with your existing teams, do you have a diversity? I'd almost guarantee most of your teams are probably driver analytical. Most businesses operate from driver analytical because driver analytical was traditional management. That's great. Expressive aimable is more leadership. And what I find with effective teams and organizations is they've got the driver analytical, the management, but they've also got the expressive aimable. See, driver analytical is credibility for your team. Expressive aimable is likability for your team. You may be a very credible team, but if everybody feels beaten up when they leave there, that's not good. You got to have a balance right there. The driver analytical is IQ. The expressive aimable is EQ, emotional intelligence. The driver analytical is the brain. The expressive aimable is the heart. So rate your teams, rate yourself of how your teams are doing and how diversity are you. What about a team of 2? Very often the teams that I work with, they're a 2-person organization. I work for a law firm, and you've heard the law firm because they advertise all the time there in Nashville. And there's 2 partners in the firm. And I suggested a strategic planning session 6 months ago, and the assistant to the president said, Greg, I don't know if that'll happen. I went, why not? Why can't we get him? He's got a condo down in Florida. Why don't we just go to Florida? I was trying to lobby to go to Florida. Let's go to Florida, get all the board together, and let's talk about strategic planning. And they're like, they don't get along too well. What? They don't get along too well. And based on what they told me is 2 partners, one was the integrator, and then one was the visionary. Now, this was pretty profound when I read this, is the integrator. Let's talk about the integrator. The integrator is more the senior level person, usually, major functions of the business. She or he effectively run the business. They're more the management of the firm, if you will, or they manage the chamber. They integrate the sales, marketing, operations. They're the glue that holds the company together. Typically, they're very good at managing people and holding them accountable. For profit and loss, they know the P&L statements. They've got it all in their hands right now. They remove obstacles so that people running the major functions can execute. They operate more on logic. They're smart. They're more on IQ. Now, right now, I can almost guarantee in your chamber, in your factory, in your organization, your business, your school system, you're sitting there going, I know that's her, that's him. Then in most organizations, you have the visionary. The visionary is opposite of the integrator. This senior level person usually, sometimes even the owner, co-owner, founder, typically has about 10 ideas a week. 9 of them are probably crazy, but one of them is the one that keeps the organization alive and growing. They typically are creative. They're great problem solvers. They're fantastic with clients, vendors, suppliers, bankers love them, the relationships, the culture of the organization. They own the culture. It's very important to them. They operate more on emotion, more on emotional intelligence, and therefore have a better barometer of how people are feeling. Now, I bet you probably have that person in mind. It may be you. You may be the integrator. The key for your team, if you're a team of 2, a partnership, Do you get along? Do you appreciate each other? The guy that fired me in my last corporate job was the integrator. I was the visionary. He didn't appreciate me. I didn't overly appreciate him that much, but I was looking for it because I'm not that smart. I could learn from him. I needed him. I think he needed me, but he's a little intimidated by me. And I'm pointing my finger at me too. I didn't do the best job of it. But what I find very often in organizations and teams is these two people right here, if you're not careful, they don't take advantage of their strengths. So you got to ask yourself in your teams, do you have these integrators and visionaries, and do they complement each other? Do they appreciate each other? In the group that I told you I worked for earlier, they don't, unfortunately. So there was a project called Aristotle. Google did it. They wanted to study those teams that were kicking butt and taking names. They concluded that the key factors, they initially thought it had to do more with, they went to Dartmouth, they went to Harvard, they went to, University of Tennessee, they were Vanderbilt graduates, wherever. Mix of skills, better incentivized. We gave them more bonuses. They made more money, had more effective, experienced managers. But no, had to do with soft skills. It was more of the soft skills. It's the book Grit by Angela Duckworth. Your grit, your EQ is a better predictor of success than your IQ. And we all know those folks we work with that are 10 times smarter than us, but we've surpassed them in moving up in the organization because guess what? We have the soft skills. So let's talk about the soft skills. And they figured out what were these soft skills at Google that made them more effective team members. One is they felt safe. They felt like they could say what was on their mind. They could do what they wanted to do without fear of reprisal. Dependability. They felt like their team members were dependable. That trust exercise there, they could fall backwards and folks were more dependable. Team structure, they had clarity. It wasn't just loosey-goosey team meetings. They knew, they went in that team meeting and they had the agenda, the outcome, the roles, the goals, the norms. They had a parking lot. They could put ideas there. Number 4, they have personal meaning and purpose. The Simon Sinek, the why. They were motivated by putting a man or woman on the moon. They were motivated by doing a vaccine to cure all this, to get people back to work. And they felt like they had an impact on the world. Now, those are pretty lofty soft skills and goals, but you might want to ask yourself with your teams that you're a part of, but also the teams that you manage, is how would they rate on these 5? The not so good news. We've talked about there's some good teams out there. There's some mediocre teams out there. Most teams are nowhere near as effective as they could be. And worse, they're often characterized by tension and dissension. And you've been a part of those that you left there just feeling whooped, after you've been in that meeting. Or a team that you were part of in high school or college that, you just didn't, you probably quit the team. You say, it's not fun anymore. Such dysfunction drains the employees' energy, enthusiasm, and creativity rather than fueling them. So again, it's an engagement strategies, teamwork. You may want to take a look at all your teams and say, folks, let's rate them. Is it time to dismantle a few? Is it time to take that board? And I know there's a lot of chamber members on here. I'm working with a economic development and chamber group up in Shelbyville, Kentucky. I was there last Thursday. We're doing a planning session in September. And the first question I asked them is how would you rate your board? They're like, what? I was like, how would you rate your board? Most boards I work with are not overly engaged. A lot of them just want to put it on the resume and they leave. But they said, we got a strong board. We used to have 18 board members. Now we have 12. We're the best we've ever been. That's good. That's good because most boards I work with, you got some folks in there that don't show up. They show up late. They're not overly committed. They're not engaged. So you've got to ask yourself, how functional is your board? Salesforce.com shows a whopping 96% of executives cite poor collaboration and communication as the main sources of workplace failures. Only 14% of the leaders, based on Deloitte survey, are completely satisfied with their ability to collaborate and make decisions as a team. So again, you may want to do that same survey. We do a survey monkey or whatever and say, we're going to talk about teams this month. So let's talk about the 5 dysfunctions of a team based on that book. And you've taken a look at that book, Absence of Trust. You got to ask yourself, do your team members actually trust each other? Do you have each other's back? Do you get outside the office? How many out there have done the battle axe, the throwing? We took a board that I worked with up in Missouri, they were a bank, pretty buttoned up group. We took them out, we ate pizza, we drank beer, and we threw axes at a piece of wood. And at first they're like, what are we doing? Oh my gosh, I never got them away. Like, oh my gosh, no, Coker, let's stay another hour. I'm like, guys, we've already spent, $300 here. Let's go, let's move on. But that develops trust when you get out to know your people and do it outside. Now, I know there's a challenge right now with social distancing and things like that, but you've got to find a way to develop that trust with your team. Fear of conflict. We'll talk about the conflict continuum in just a few minutes. Is there harmony, but it's really not real harmony? Nobody's just stepping up. That's that form, storm, norm, perform. That's the storm. The lack of commitment. How committed is everyone to the team? And what about accountability? Dude, you said you're going to do that. You didn't do it. Can you grab Greg and say, Greg, dude, I love you, man, but my gosh, you didn't do what you said you're going to do. I'm sorry. Well, I know you're sorry, man, but you got to do. Okay, but is there a relationship between you and Greg that you can really grab me and sort of shake me into? That's accountability. And then what about the results? How accountable are you to the results? So what if you're not firing on all 3 of these cylinders? Remember the 3 ideal team members? You got humility, you've got hunger, and you got smarts. So guess what? If you got, going back to that circle there, which we're going to talk about right there, is you've got humility, but you lack smarts. And in this book here, The Ideal Team Player, they call that the accidental mess maker. They're humble, but they haven't done their homework. Dude, man, I love you. You're a good dude. You're a good lad. I mean, I love you. But my gosh, do your homework. You've got those folks. You didn't read the plays. You come to practice and you're cutting up with everybody, but you don't know the plays. Humility and smart, but you lack hunger. Now, how many have been a part, that person? They're smart. They're humble. They're just slackers. They just don't lack my son, big old boy. I mean, he was in 7th, 8th grade. He's the biggest kid on a basketball team. He had talent. He had no hunger. He didn't want to be there. And, it's like Michael Jordan said, to be a great player, you've got to have skills and passion. The Tiger Woods, you got to have skill and passion. Those 2, and that's not number 2. Hunger and smart, but not humble. The skillful politician. That's been me in the past. I'll be honest with you. I didn't mean to hurt anybody by it, but I was more interested in maybe networking and working the crowd and then people looked at me. I wasn't trying to be the brown noser. They're going, oh my gosh. And that was a blind spot. And part of emotional intelligence is you're open to uncover your blind spot. So you, as your teams, get your teams together and say, folks, let's go around the room. And we're probably all guilty of 1 or 2 of these. Which one, if you're not careful, you'll fall into? So I can feel comfortable saying, I got to be careful of that skillful politician. Coker, you're right, you do. Hey, guess what, guy? When you see me doing it, wink at me or come over and grab me and say, Coker, you can do that later, whatever. I don't mean anything by it. I just like talking to people or whatever. So ask yourself and rate your teams there. What about leading teams? Here's a case study. Commander Chris Hadfield. Google him. He was the astronaut, the commander of the International Space Station. Obviously, he was Canadian. He had a team of Americans and Russians comprised of smart Americans and Russians, the oldest and youngest, 2.5 decades apart in age. So you had some millennials, you had some old dudes like me. Language barriers, obviously, cultural differences. How do you take those two cultures, age, Russian, America, and put those folks on the moon and make sure we land safely? He was charged with pretty much telling his team what to do 24 hours a day. So before the mission, what did he do? He got to know his people. So before your mission in your organization, before you get to this post-COVID-19 plan and you've got your team together, do you know your team? Now you're driven because in a crisis, you're all driver. And that's great, but you may want to cool your jets a little bit, no pun intended. Cool your jets like Chris Hadfield did and get to know your people. He taught himself Russian. So guess what? If you're getting ready to go to East Tennessee and you live in Nashville, have you taught yourself East Tennessean? And I can say that because East Kentucky, I'm from Kentucky. East Kentucky is like East Tennessee, and I got to understand Pikeville, Kentucky. I got to understand Louisville, Kentucky, and Nashville, Tennessee, and Memphis, Tennessee, and Jackson. The diversity. You've got to teach yourself Russian. Number 3, he moved to the U.S. Then he moved to Russia to show, hey, I'm committed. I want to be a part of you. He brought his team together to learn how they could respect each other and best work together. They met each other's families, heard everyone backstories, ate Big Macs, and downed some vodka. My favorite, I think it was Reagan, when Gorbachev came over to Camp David, and or maybe it was Reagan's ranch out in California. And Reagan was a big horseshoe thrower. My dad, Hartsville, Tennessee, he grew up in Hartsville. He grew up in Hartsville, Tennessee. We learned how to throw horseshoes at 5 years old. Loved horseshoes. Well, Gorbachev had never heard of horseshoes before. Well, Reagan teaches them how to throw horseshoes. And as the story goes, Gorbachev, within about an hour or so, was loving it and had a ringer and just went crazy, thinking, oh my gosh, he just went crazy. Well, Reagan supposedly had one of his staffers take that horseshoe, go into town and get a piece of wood from Hobby Lobby or wherever he did it and mount that horseshoe. And over dinner that night, presented Gorbachev with the horseshoe. Wow. That instant rapport. And talk about economic development. And Susie and Carol and I were talking about that earlier. And I've worked with TVA before, great organization. What happens very often, I know in the organizations I work with, as soon as the plane lands in Gallatin, Tennessee, or in Knoxville, or wherever you are in Tennessee or Kentucky, as soon as it lands, you wear them out about your community. And that's the worst thing you can do. The best thing is to eat some Big Macs and maybe drink some vodka. Don't even drink vodka, get to know them. Martha Lane Collins in Kentucky, first female governor, brought Toyota to Kentucky. She was a former school teacher, had emotional intelligence, so much more than any governor before and probably after. Well, the Japanese were looking at Tennessee. They were looking at Kentucky, Indiana, a lot of states. They came to Kentucky. You know why? Because of firecrackers. Martha Lane Collins, the governor of Kentucky, knew that Japanese love firecrackers. And they came in late, and she took them to the governor's mansion. And about 10:30 or 11, the story goes, they opened up the windows in the governor's mansion, and all of a sudden, boom, 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 boom. Again, the Japanese are thinking, oh my gosh. In Tennessee's got the Volkswagen story, Lamar Alexander. Supposedly, the way that Volkswagen got to Chattanooga is because Lamar Alexander was down at one of the houses in Chattanooga, and someone said, hey, Senator, why don't you play some piano for us? And he goes, I've been a little bit rusty. And no, why don't you play? Don't play. He goes, okay, I'll play. He played the equivalent of Rocky Top for the Germans. Boom, close the deal. And that's before the mission. You've got to get to know your people. They even role played, Hadfield did, of how they would support each other if one of them lost a loved one while in space, which actually someone did. I had a family member who did die. So they practiced and role played this. Commander Hadfield's goal, by the time we rocket out of our orbit, we would not just be co-workers, but a codified, unified team. Do you love your employees? Do you love your team members? You spend more time with them. And why don't I tell people that I talked to Hal Good this morning? Y'all don't know Hal Good. Hal Good's from Springfield, Kentucky. I've known Hal Good for probably 15 years. He called me. We talked about an online leadership workshop I'm doing in September. Got off the phone, went into the kitchen, and Nikki, my wife, goes, who are you talking to? I said, Hal Good. And she goes, oh, you love Hal Good. I said, I love Hal Good. Have I told Hal Good I love him? Probably not. Guys don't do that. Well, we should do it. You've got to love your team members. And that's exactly what Hadfield did. In space, lots of rules and procedures. They followed them. Unwritten rule, each member of the crew must perform at least one unsolicited act of kindness for every crew member every day. And that was a big task for 5 months. Often anonymous, these actions focused each person on serving other people versus serving Greg Coker, and kept tempers in check and egos in the right place. That one simple practice based on Commander Hadfield said had the biggest impact of bringing his team together. So again, unsolicited acts of kindness. Do your teams have that? The 5 disciplines of a team leader. Number 1, understand generations. You've got to understand millennials, Gen Xers, boomers. You know, I had a friend of mine in Louisville, Kentucky that had 10 employees. He said, you all can get $10,000 extra a year. This was a couple years ago, or I'll give you Fridays to work at home. And he said, every one of them took Fridays at home, working home. Well, to his credit, he understood what that generation was looking for. Versus sitting there going, you're crazy. You're not working from home. You got to be in the office. Well, you got to be in the office most of the time. But guess what? If you can be at home and get as much done and still maintain that cohesiveness of your team, you know, let's try for a little bit. Number 2, manage to one job. It's called job sculpting. I never heard of this before. Manage to one, job sculpting. What it basically says is, and when I worked there in Nashville for a utility, my boss didn't do a very good job of that because I was part of a team. But guess what? I love politics. I love playing the game or whatever. I actually got the governor, I got some money from our political action committee to give to Governor Haslam when he was the governor of Tennessee. So I got the money from our company, hand delivered it because I wasn't the registered lobbyist. I could do that then. I went to a couple of fundraisers. I got Marsha Blackburn when she was Congresswoman to come into our organization. So I love that stuff. My boss should have said, Greg, that's not your job per se, but I know you like it. So guess what? When we get these 2 tickets to the inauguration, why don't you and Nikki go? But you know what he did? And I thought that was going to happen. We got the 2 tickets. And he said, Greg, Pat's going. I went, what? Pat doesn't like politics and she really doesn't want to go because I've already talked to her. He goes, no, you're not going. What? You know, that's not managing to one. You can have a team member be a part of a team, but you need to understand what motivates him or her even outside the team. You know, give them tickets to a UT ball game or something. And that's brilliant. Number 3, speed, productivity, working faster, smarter. You know, Steve Jobs was a real horse's butt. If you read any of his books or his book, his autobiography, I know it was a biography. I'm sorry, somebody else wrote it. But one thing he did is he pushed and pushed and pushed. We will have an 8-hour battery. Number 4, challenge everything. Thinking outside those 9 dots that we've talked about earlier. And then customer alignment. Are you customer focused? So again, rate your teams, rate yourself on these. Cycles of service, going back to number 5, customer alignment. We talked about this in an earlier Zoom call. If I'm Delta Airlines, I'm looking at every step Greg Coker has to go through to get to Atlanta, Georgia, if he's flying from BNA, Nashville, Tennessee. Well, you got to put yourself in Greg Coker's shoes. Greg Coker all of a sudden gets a call from a client, says, I need you to be in Atlanta next week. Okay, who am I going to fly? So I Google flights to Atlanta. So is Delta doing their job with social marketing, advertising? Then I call Delta, 800 number. I go online. So it may be the second dot. And then I talk to an agent, or I don't talk to an agent. I do it online. And then, you know, so you see, Delta goes through everything Greg Coker has to do to get to Atlanta, Georgia. And that's what teams do. They look at customer alignment. What are we doing to make sure our customers don't have to go through too many steps? Then what they do is they identify key moments of truth. So all of them are important. But parking at BNA may be one of the most important things for me, which it is. My wife's a flight attendant and she flies out of Nashville. She used to fly to Cincinnati. You know, she's having a tough time getting used to BNA parking. It's a little bit further from the terminal. She has to take the employee bus. It takes her like 45 minutes from once she gets to BNA Nashville Airport to get to her gate. That is a key moment of truth. So you've got to ask yourself, what are the key moments of truth for your chamber members or for your industrial customers, your school system, your parents? What about managing and leading your team? We talked about this in leadership and adversity, the situational leadership. You know, you start off directing your team, then you may move in a little bit more coaching, a little bit more two-way communication. So your directive is, here's what I want you all to do. Here's your task. So let's get started. Then you go back and say, hey folks, here's what I want you all to focus on this week. Here's why. Now, what questions do you have? So it's a little more two-way. Then eventually support them once the team's been intact for a while. I got an issue. Our company's got an issue. I don't know how we're going to handle it, but here it is. I'm not advocating to you, but you all take a look at it. I'm going to be next door for the next couple, 3-4 days. Call me if you need anything. You wouldn't do that on day one. And then delegation is once the team's been rock and rolling for a year or so, hey, it's an acting team. I'm not going to bug you. If you need something to run interference at corporate, give me a call. So you've got to ask yourself how, and I had actually a school system, a college system that used situational leadership in their college classes. He had 2 different classes going on. The first class taught it just as normal. I lecture, you're the student, I talk, you listen. Okay, that's pretty much a directive. Never changed throughout the whole semester. The second class, he taught situational leadership to. So the first 3 or 4 weeks was pretty much me lecture, I talk, you listen. But then eventually he started saying, okay, folks, we're going to group you into groups of 2 or 3. Here's what I want you all to talk about today. Here's why I'm going to stay in the room. Then eventually, maybe the next 3 weeks was put them in a circle. He sat in a circle. They were going to talk about the Civil War. You all to start the conversation. Okay, yeah, interesting. And then eventually the last 3 or 4 weeks of the class, he said, I got a class I'm teaching in another state next week, and I'm going to be a little bit busy. I'm going to be down the hall if you need anything. You all continue as usual. Then at the very last day of the last week of the session, he put on both sessions, remember the first session had been being taught traditionally, on a chalkboard, professor out sick, carry on as normal. Well, that group went home, went back to the dorm because they'd been lectured to. The second group, professor out sick, continue as usual. You know what they did? They stayed. They said, well, he hadn't been here for the last 4 or 5 weeks. They said, go ahead and meet today. It's that empowerment of your team. And a lot of it is dictated on your leadership style. Leaders of teams, actual team members, an accurate assessment of where our teams are and responding accordingly. Going to hit this one really quick. We've already talked about it quite a bit. Form, storm, norm, perform, total transformation. Guess what? Your teams are going through this right here. Anytime there's a new member on a team, you automatically go back down to form. So you got to ask yourself, team, where are we? You'll never get the norm unless you go through storm. But storm doesn't mean attacking each other. It means attacking the issue. So let's talk about behaviors and needs during each stage. Form. And again, I'm going to send this to Carolyn. She can send these out to you. The real orientation. I think we do a crappy job with orientation onboarding. I mean, I've got to do a better job of really orienting my team. And it may take 3 or 4 days to talk about goals, roles, objectives, mission, vision, have a guest speaker come in from corporate, talk about financials, go out and see one of our customer sites. That's form, because you're never going to avoid the next stage of storm, but you're going to get into it a lot faster if you don't do your homework on form. So conflict resolution in storm, confidentiality, protecting self-esteem. This is the conflict continuum, as I mentioned earlier. And you want to be in the middle. On your left-hand side, no conflict, artificial harmony. How many have been a part of a team like that? You're next door and you don't hear any, beating anybody up. You're like, well, they must be getting along. There's some artificial harmony. And then on the far right is mean-spirited, harsh conflict. Most teams, in my opinion, are probably about where that yellow mark is right there. Ideally is where the green mark, where you're not conflict, but you're challenging. You're challenging each other. If you go over the blue mark, you can recover. You can say you're sorry. Say, yeah, I'm sorry. We got a little line on that. Let's time out. Let's take a break, folks. We're attacking each other versus issues. Let's go back to our group norms, find out where we are. If you go to the red, you may have damaged some relationships right there. So again, you may want to rate your teams there at the bottom is on a scale of 1 to 10. Where are you? Where are you? And be honest with yourself. The norm stage, form, storm, norm, you're starting to click. You can praise them. You still got to be available. And then perform is gravitas, not being arrogant. If you're UT or Vanderbilt or MTSU, whatever, you can walk in that stadium with some gravitas, but you can't be arrogant. You can have a little bit of swagger, but you can't strut. That celebration, avoid burnout, avoid complacency, and realize the fluid nature. Because guess what? Your butt's going to be back down to form pretty soon. Because anytime you hire somebody, you go to form. When someone retires, you go to form. When there's a pandemic, you go to form. So it's always a fluid nature. I'm going to go through this. When we talked about this in the last traction, what are your WIG goals? And that's the air traffic controller metaphor there. If you're the team member, if you're the team leader, guess what? Every one of these projects think they're the most important. The most important is that one coming in hot right there, that wildly important. You got to identify your wildly, the WIG goals, wildly important. Discipline number 2, make sure you're measuring those lead behaviors. Because if you just look at the lag results, losing 20 pounds, which I'm trying to lose some weight, I'll get depressed if I'm just looking at the scale for 20 pounds. I got to say, well, I didn't eat bread today. I was a good boy. I didn't eat any dessert. And then number 3 is you got to keep score. We play differently when we keep score. And then discipline number 4 is those accountability talks. Is your team getting together weekly, maybe for 15 minutes, maybe for 5 minutes? This is what I said I would do. This is what I did. This is what I'm going to do this week. So I mentioned, before you do a meeting, I would have this on your board. I teach facilitation skills. What is the outcome? What's our agenda for the day? What roles? The number one reason for conflict in teams is lack of role clarity. The lack of role clarity is the number one reason for conflict in teams. Well, I thought I was supposed to do that. Well, no, he's doing it. Well, he's doing it. Role clarity, and that's the form stage, talking about roles. In the form stage, you're talking about outcome, agenda, roles, norms, parking lot, action plans. And that's before you start your meeting. And that's the form stage. So I've got assessments we can do. This is sort of my shameless self-promotion right here. Tying it all together. I would love for you to connect. I just got my business page, Greg Coker Development, on Facebook. If you could like it, I'm trying to share a lot more relevant data. I'm on Instagram. I haven't started it yet, but I'm trying to. So again, Carolyn, Susie, we went turbo speed. Thank you all very much. I've been honored to be a part of your all's chamber doing these 4 sessions. So we'll just open it up. So thank you all very much.
Awesome. Thanks, Greg. I'm going to send the previous link I sent for your Facebook business page. I believe
was an old one. So I'm going to send everybody that link now.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. So that should be an easy click through if anybody wants to do that. Let me send. Awesome. Greg, no, that was excellent. I know we're pushing kind of our full 50 minutes. So I know we don't want to go too long, but if anybody does have questions in the meantime, please send those in the chat. I read an article the other day, Greg, and I think a lot of what you spoke about kind of hits on that. And the phrase was that culture eats strategy for lunch. I think a lot of that kind of reflects on teamwork and, like you said, kind of knowing a little bit more about your team and your staff per se than just who they are and what they do at work.
A friend of mine is a former NFL coach for Chicago Bears, and he says X and O. It's not X and O's. It should be the Jim and Joe's. And I'd never heard of it before. I thought that's good. It's just not the X and O's, the strategy. It's the Jim and Joe's, and you better know your Jim and Joe's.
Yeah, I know at the soft skills you always do your introduction. Talking about when you were at Atmos and who hired you versus who fired you. And I feel like that also very relevant to how they knew you on a personal level. One question did just come in. When you do have a conflict of personalities on a team, what would you say is the best way to work around that?
Great question. There's no easy answer. I would say maybe do that social style model. Start it out without saying, Greg, you're expressive. And Kevin, you're analytical. No longer you don't get all right. Just hey, folks, we've done some research. The best teams are the ones that appreciate each other. You're really doing it for Greg and Kevin, but Greg and Kevin, you're not embarrassing Greg and Kevin by pointing out that difference. So, hey, we're going to do this as a team this morning. We're going to go through. So we're going to describe each quadrant, and then we're going to go around the room. And I want you to say, number 1, which style do you think you are? Number 1. Number 2, how you think this has made you successful. Number 3, how have you taken that style occasionally, not very often, but how have you taken that and used it in excess? So if I were a driver, I may become too bossy sometimes. And then number 4, which style drives you crazy, to be honest? Number 6, what could you learn from that style if you could only appreciate them a little bit more? Well, that Anvil, they drive me crazy because they're always needy, whatever. Well, that's what drives me crazy about them, but what could you learn from them? And what do you admire about them? Well, they got their pulse on the people. and people love them. I look at Nikki's office, everybody's always in there with Nikki, whatever. So you're starting to almost say it's okay that I feel the way I feel, but I need to start working on it. So great question, but just let's be honest. We drive each other crazy. We want to kill each other occasionally, but we can't. So let's start loving each other all over again. And forgiveness and reconciliation, my third book, is just to be able to say, I'm sorry. As a leader, I'm sorry for anything that I've done or said. I didn't mean it. Come talk to me one-on-one if I'd said something else, but let's start all over. We got to start all over. Great question. Other comments, chats?
Yeah, I think we've got one more question. That's probably good time-wise as well. So what if
you are a member and you're not the team leader? What are your thoughts on how to move a team out of the red area?
Another great question is, I would think if I'm the leader of that team and you're a team member and you take the initiative to recognize that, again, protect my self-esteem, because if I'm the leader, I've got obviously an ego into it. Maybe you can come to me personally offline and say, Greg, thanks for being the leader of the team, but man, I'll be honest with you. Here's a model that I just ran across, and I sort of think we may be on that red zone a little bit. And would you mind maybe me sharing this model with the team, and let's do sort of a self-assessment? But go to her or him offline, because if you do it, and I've probably made that mistake before, is you embarrass him or her, then there's a lot of egos involved, unfortunately, with all this. So you got to name the behavior at some point. You just got to do it in a very tactful way and protect self-esteem. But you got to identify it, because if you don't identify it, you just, and more than likely all your other team members are thinking the same thing. You're sitting there going, oh, thank you for bringing that up. But it's got to be in a very protective environment.
Awesome. Yeah, great feedback. I'm going to send in the chat for everyone. If you will take
just a minute or two, we've got a quick little survey that will kind of wrap up our series. Would love some feedback. And then Greg, will you share, I know you and Susie and I spoke at the beginning about another training opportunity that you have coming up, and then also mention the Goodlettsville date that you'll be with the Goodlettsville Chamber.
Okay, the 3 R's, the reinvention, I've had to reinvent, and I've never done an online leadership course, but I've had a lot of folks reach out and say, we'd love to go to, a course, can't travel. We don't know what's going to happen in September, October. So starting September 15th through December 3rd, it's a 10-week program, Tuesday nights, Thursday nights. The first hour is going to be more content. The next hour is going to be more debrief. We're going to have fireside chats. We'll have industry leaders come in, and just chat. We're going to have a capstone project. They'll get a certificate at the end of 10 weeks. It's going to be high tech, high touch. There'll be cohorts. There'll be books to read. It'll be pretty intense. But if anybody on this call, or if you know someone in your organization that, I think through Gallup, salary is always at the top, but self-development has gone in front of salary for employee engagement. So I'm offering this program, and I know selfless self-promotion, but I honestly believe that maybe if you go to that employer, you go to your board and say, listen, for this amount of money, and it's $1,500, but I told Susie and Carolyn, I'll give 20% discount to all Tennessee Chamber members and industry members. So that's $1,300 or whatever, for a 10-week program, no travel. So that's coming up in September. I'll be promoting that here. And then if you like me on Facebook, I'll be promoting that. Or if you email me, I'll send you the material on it. I'll be honored to work with you. Honored to have you all on the program. I'm looking at about 20 people, 20, 25 people. I'm going to try to keep it at a good level. And then July 20, is it July 23rd?
Yes.
In Goodlettsville. Yes. So we'll be in Goodlettsville, great chamber. I've worked with them before. And I'm not sure what I'm speaking about. I have to talk to what they want, but it'll probably be something around leadership and adversity, or building cathedrals, the power of purpose, or just a hodgepodge of some things that are on my mind. So thank you all very much, Carolyn, Susie, and everybody on the call.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you so much for coming to us with this idea. And I've gotten so many good emails, positive about these presentations, and we just really appreciate you. And
my pleasure.
offerings.
I appreciate you all. Love you guys.
You too. Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful week.